Bible talks about matzah, the special food of the Passover Seder, in two diametrically opposed ways. The book of Deuteronomy describes matzah as lechem oni, the poor bread. Presumably, this is the kind of food that our ancestors ate while they were slaves in the land of Egypt. And yet, the book of Exodus presents matzah, perhaps in the more familiar light, as the bread of freedom, that bread that was baked on their way out of Egypt, and they didn't have time to let it rise, so they cooked it on the stones on the side of the road on their journey out. The rabbis had to make sense of this diametrically opposed description of the matzah, and they do so in the text of the Haggadah in a very interesting way. At the very beginning of the Magid section, that section of the Seder where we tell the story of the Exodus, we say in Aramaic, "Halachma anya de achalu av hatana ba'ara de Mitzrayim." We hold up the matzah and say, this is the poor bread that our ancestors ate in the land of Egypt, explicitly drawing on Deuteronomy's version. And yet, at the very end of the Magid section, at the very end of our telling of the story, we quote Rabban Gamliel, the famous sage of the Mishnah, who describes that the matzah is the bread of freedom. So why? What has happened in between the beginning of this section and the end? And I think what's going on here is that we're supposed to imagine that something changes when we tell a story. Here, in theory, it's the matzah that changes. It has gone from the bread of affliction to the bread of freedom. At the beginning, we hold it up in one way, and by the time we eat it, we experience it in a very different way. And yet I also think that it is us who are encouraged to change. And when we tell stories in this very particular rabbinic way, we are supposed to change. And the Seder itself is supposed to change us to look forward towards freedom.